Hello, my Bill 5000 Nation. How is everyone doing today? Hopefully, everyone's having a great day. If not, I hope it gets better from here. We are back with another Coffeehouse Crime. That's right. This one is titled, He Became the FBI's Most Wanted and Hid for 12 Years. Wow. All right. I'm excited to get into today's story. If you're excited, go ahead. Turn them lights down low. Put on something comfy. Cuddle up with someone special. Let's get... Damn. Let's just damn. Let's just, yeah. Yep.
Yaser Saeed's violent crimes against his own family were so barbaric that they landed him a place on the FBI's most wanted list. And this video explores the dark depths of his actions and what followed. Chasing the American dream, his concerning behavior began almost as soon as he landed in the United States.
I live in America. I have never once had a dream of murdering my whole family. That's not the American dream, but I hope. If so, I'm having the wrong dream.
But as time passed by and his attitude remained unchecked, his arrogance would lead to some truly haunting actions, spanning far beyond murder. In the aftermath, Yaser found himself as a fugitive on the run, with members of his family supporting him behind the scenes. But what did Yaser Abdel Saeed do to get here? How long did he remain hidden for, and how did he do it? Religion is a very personal decision to make, and we are all free to choose who and what we follow. But when your beliefs start to negatively impact or even hurt those around you, where is the line drawn between religious expression and outright abuse? Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, folks. My name is Adrian, and welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime. Today we're looking at the case of Yaser Abdel Saeed. And it has to be said again that this case is so gnarly, it put him on the FBI's most wanted list. Before we begin though, and just to let you know that I post true crime and strange cases here weekly, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing to the channel. And now, with that said, please grab yourself a coffee, pull up a seat and get ready for the deep dive. This is the case of Yaser Abdel Saeed. Howdy folks, and welcome back to the Lone Star State, better known as Texas. It's the home of cowboys, Tex-Mex, and
Oh wait, Texas? Oh shit.
Delightful southern hospitality. And with nearly 30 million people calling this place home, there is plenty of history to dive into. When thinking about the city of Dallas, sports enthusiasts amongst us will think of the NFL's Cowboys and the NBA's Mavericks, while music fans will know it as the home of Kenny Rogers and Roy Orbison. And of course, those with heritage in mind will think of the Alamo, a pivotal event of military engagement in the Texas Revolution. Personally though, I just can't get my thoughts past that delicious Tex-Mex. It also plays host to Houston's mission control for NASA. The phrase, "Houston, we have a problem," was immortalized during the ill-fated Apollo 13 mission, but almost all other launches, successful or otherwise, have taken off from Texas. For our story today, we're homing in on Irving, found in Dallas County. With the city boasting a current population of just under 250,000 people, it was once called home by the Dallas Cowboys until their former stadium was torn down in 2011. Irving remains a popular place for newly established immigrants. And
man, see, that's why I love watching Coffee. I get to learn things. You get he goes that extra step to get you really set into the location. I really do respect that. I do. I love it.
Sports a community more diverse than the rest of the state. It is currently one of the fastest growing cities and also generates a very healthy economy. And one of those families living in the suburbs of Irving were the Saeeds. Beginning with the main character of our case today, Yaser Abdel Saeed was born on January 27, 1957 in Sinai, Egypt. He was born into a relatively affluent family alongside two older brothers, and despite living a fairly happy and successful life in Egypt, his parents eventually divorced. When his father remarried, it turned out that Yaser and his siblings would be left without any financial support. Thus, they were forced to make their own way in life. After watching his two brothers emigrate to America and forge successful lives for themselves, Yaser decided to follow in their footsteps. And although he had originally moved to America on a student visa, this was dangerously close to expiring by the start of 1987. Around this time frame, Yaser and his brothers were all approaching their 30s, and it's here that the first of many shocking details began to emerge. One of his brothers tried to date a 15-year-old named Patricia Owens, and when she rejected his advances, Yaser tried to win her over instead. Rather concerningly, this led to a relationship between the two, and only 1 week after dating Patricia, Yaser then proposed to her. Honestly, there are so many red flags here already. Despite the alarming age differences, due to Texas law, the marriage
Was he pushing it just so he didn't have to go back home? Because his school visa was about to expire?
was actually permitted.
It's fucked
All
up.
they needed was written consent from Patricia's parents, which they seemingly provided. And although there did seem to be some caution from Patricia's family, they were genuinely confident that Yaser was a good match for her. I'm really trying to wrap my head around this. Following a brief period of discussion, the two eventually married in a Christian church in February 1987. Now, Yaser was determined to begin building a family together, and so by the time Patricia turned 18 years old, she already had 3 children with him. The eldest child, her son Islam, with his 2 younger daughters Sarah and Amina. Yaser was not a particularly academically qualified individual, and he mainly created income for his family by providing taxi services. Having said that though, his dedication seemed to vary over the years, and there seemed to be various problems with his employers. While most of his companies in his local area would eventually decline to even lease a taxi to him, his final employer seemed to speak quite highly of Yaser. Colleagues described him as crazy and unpredictable, and even those supportive of him didn't have many good things to say either. He was quite fearless, unafraid to work in the more turbulent downtown area and deal with the violent drunks. And by this point, he was known to always carry a gun on him while he worked. You can likely guess for yourself already, but Yaser was not a good man. And surprise, surprise, it didn't take long for issues to appear within the family. Given that Patricia had married him at the incredibly tender age of 15, it could be argued that it was already too late. Sadly, this poor young woman was already trapped. And over time, Yaser began to show his true colours as a bitter man. Feeling inferior to his more successful brothers, he began to work overtime in order to bring more money into the household. Yet, from Patricia's perspective, she felt that he never earned enough to keep them in a good position. The eldest son, named Islam, was clearly favoured above the rest of Yaser's family. He was allowed to address his mother by her first name and was also treated with blatant favouritism. And by all accounts, Yaser himself and Islam were self-appointed as higher ranking than his wife and daughters. According to his family, Yaser was endlessly paranoid and was always worrying that people were out to get him. These unfounded beliefs resulted in him taking control in the only place where he truly felt that he had authority. That, of course, sadly being within his own home. The results of this dissatisfaction and unfounded worry would prove catastrophic for the women within his family unit. It wasn't long until a toxic pattern began to emerge. A pattern which saw Patricia reaching the end of her tether. And in 1997, out of desperation, she abruptly moved out with the children. However, she was sadly unable to stay away, and by March of 1998 they had reunited, with Patricia agreeing to move back in with him in a different house found in Covington near Hillsborough. Sadly, the financial situation didn't improve. Yaser began to work at a local store, and the family existed in near squalor. It was by the end of 1998 that Patricia left with the children once again, this time with Child Protective Services getting involved. And sadly, this was for a very troubling reason. In recent months, both daughters had confided in their grandmother that they were being abused by their father, Yaser, in the worst possible of ways. Obviously, the news devastated her. Police statements were taken and reports were made. Yet, despite the diabolical claims, Patricia was already faltering in her decision to leave Yaser. Despite the charges being laid against him, the 2 young girls eventually withdrew their statements and even said that they had lied about the abuse. Personally, I find this very hard to believe. I think that both daughters probably faced intense pressure or even threats to retract their claims against their father. But by the beginning of the following year, Yaser no longer had any pending charges against him. And just like that, Patricia returned with open arms and the children in tow. Shortly after this, another disturbing behavior in Yaser had become noticeable. He had begun to obsessively monitor his wife and daughters both in and out of the house. Shortly after, they began to work at a convenience store. It's here that he began to stalk them outside in his car, keeping a watchful eye on what they were doing and even getting angry when they smiled at strangers.
She can't see us from inside, right?
Oh.
Huh?
No.
She smiled to the customers.
Bubba, she has to. Part of her job.
She's in trouble.
What the fuck is wrong with this
Now,
motherfucker, bro?
I get it. Every responsible father worries about his children growing up, especially a daughter who is just about to find her independence. But the way that Yaser was acting and behaving here was outright unhinged. It is worth mentioning here, by the way, that Patricia was actually with Yaser for all of these excursions, and with her passive reactions, she was basically enabling his behavior. Without his wife challenging him and, frankly, his disgusting behavior, this sort of spying continued both inside and
She was probably fucking scared too, bro. Sounds like he's been kind of brainwashing all of them like this whole fucking time.
outside of the home, and unfortunately, this extended way past basic surveillance. Amina and Sarah became too scared to even take phone calls by their friends, worried that their father would be listening in the background. He was always there, lurking, just waiting for them to slip up. In his mind, Yaser was becoming very unhappy with both Amina and Sarah. His daughters were becoming too westernized for his liking, and often associated with other American boys. Which literally just makes sense in my mind. You did decide to raise your family in America, mate. It was during this time of over-monitoring that Amina had fallen in love with a local boy named Joseph Marino. During the year of 2004, the two had met through taekwondo classes, and although their friendship blossomed into teenage romance, they had to be very careful with Yaser around. The lovers learned to regulate and censor their text messages to prevent him from getting angry, and it was generally understood that Amina's father was always listening and watching. Amina began to write personal emails and poetry during this time, detailing just how unhappy she was with her life at home. She had grown to be increasingly fearful of her father, with one email sent to her history teacher spelling out this quite bluntly. That email reading, "He will without any drama or doubt kill us." Found in one of her private writing books, Amina wrote the following poem. "My heart, an open wound, I can only cry. Don't try to understand, make me a bird, let me fly. I hate you, I hate your land, you've frozen my heart, let me die. Make me an angel, let me fly. Endless tyranny, round and round, let me go. Where can I be found? My pain you will never know. Make me a leaf, let me fly, let me blow. You hang on, you think you want me, you don't want to know. You don't know me, and here I don't want to be."
Man, she's in pain,
Speaking
bro.
of warning signs and red flags, classmates often
She's in some pain. Wow.
asked about the various marks and bruises left on both of the girls' arms. All in the meanwhile, the pair made no secret of the fact that they were from their father, and yet still, shockingly, nothing was done about this. In typical teenage fashion, Amina and Joseph had plans to run away and get married. This was despite the mutual understanding that they would always be in danger from Yaser and his so-called contacts in the underworld. Aside from the intense surveillance in and out of the home, Yaser also started refusing to work unless the girls were either asleep or being watched and monitored by their brother Islam. In very stark contrast, he had full trust in his son and none in his daughters. I find this part crazy, but he even tampered with Amina's car, replacing the airbag, you know, that famously critical safety feature, with the recording device so he could monitor everything that was being said. This was typical behavior of Yaser, by the way. Not only was he controlling enough to remove any and all privacy from his daughters, but he was also reckless and stupid enough to remove their safety too. Unbeknownst to Amina at the time, but her father had already chosen a husband for her in Egypt. And although this is typical for an arranged marriage, this is not something that westernized young women are used to. No surprise,
not
but
at
she
all.
rejected the proposal outright, which did nothing but further frustrate her father. You see, Yaser would have received a sizable dowry from the groom, a payment from the family for her hand in marriage, and he was planning on using the money to better finance himself for the next several years. Her objections meant that this financial arrangement had essentially vanished right in front of Yaser's face, and he rather viciously claimed that she had brought disgrace to the family, at least in his mind anyway. Outraged by her decision, Yaser began to look through Amina's phone bills in an effort to try and find out what she was hiding, or who she was involved with. And his behaviour took a newfound low on Christmas of 2007, when he even threatened her with his firearm, thus leading to the wife and daughters fleeing the house once again. Alongside Amina's and Sarah's boyfriends, they fled Texas to stay with their aunt in Kansas, and afterwards found accommodation in Tulsa. What the girls really needed here was a strong mother who desperately cared about their safety. But sadly, Patricia once again began to have doubts about leaving the family home.
Motherfucker
By
threatened
New
y'all
Year's
with a
Eve,
gun,
Patricia
bruh.
tried to drag her
What the
daughters back to
fuck?
Texas.
Don't put
Sarah
up with that shit.
reluctantly agreed to temporarily head back, but
How you just gonna... Why are you going back? Sorry. Why? Why though? I mean, seriously. The dudes pulled a gun on you and your kids and every fucking thing else. It's time for you to fucking go, bruh. Man up, grow some balls, and bitch slap that motherfucker and then walk out the damn door.
Amina,
Jesus.
she refused. However, after heavy persuasion, she was eventually convinced to take the journey back home. And tragically, this would be the last time that her boyfriend Joseph ever saw her alive.
It's
The
fucked
last
up.
words to him were, "You failed us." January the 1st, 2008. It was on New Year's Day that Yaser took both of his daughters out in his taxi. It seemed that he was offering peace, because he claimed that they were going out for a drive to get some food and talk things out. However, what would actually happen would be far, far more brutal. It was during this drive that, at 7:35 p.m, a harrowing phone call was made to the Irvine police.
Do we really want to hear any more of this piece of shit? Because we could stop here and I'd be just okay. No, I couldn't stop here and be okay about it. I'd go down the rabbit hole being like, what did happen? Did anything happen at all? I don't know. And then I'd been back here looking through all this shit. So yeah, let's just get, yeah, fuck it.
Department.
Traumatizing.
What's going on, ma'am?
I'm dying, that's what's up.
Irving Fire Department. Ma'am, are you still there? Ma'am, are you still there? All I've got is she's telling me she's dying. I've got a, why are you still there, ma'am? Ma'am, what is your address? Ma'am.
Despite the clearly urgent and violent nature of the phone call, the caller was put on hold multiple times, and the authorities failed to ascertain an address or location right away. By the time the authorities had found the taxi, both girls had sadly passed away from their injuries. Amina had been shot twice, and Sarah a total of 9 times. And as for their father, Yaser Saeed was nowhere to be seen. The story of Amina.
She was put on hold. That poor baby was laying in a damn taxi cab shot by her fucking piece of shit daddy. And this motherfucking operator would put her on hold and everything else. These two poor babies got the shit into the stick everywhere they fucking turned. A shithole fucking mother, an even shittier fucking father. What the fuck?
And Sarah's deaths dominated local and national headlines alike, and this was for 2 very obvious reasons. Not only had 2 young girls come to such a tragic end, But the primary suspect, being their very own father, was now on the run. Although many speculated that this was a so-called honor killing, the authorities would not publicly name it to be one quite yet. However, slowly, more and more began to believe it after the family's personal lives began to leak to the public's attention. No religion advocates honor killings. However, there are extreme cases where people will commit murder with the excuse of it in a desperate attempt to justify their own actions. This was apparently the motivation given for Yaser's unspeakable crime. He believed that he had been driven to kill both of his daughters to restore his family's honor, when, to be honest, in reality, he was just an aggressive piece of shit father. Following the murder of her daughters and the disappearance of her husband, Patricia seemed to be more concerned about Yaser's identity, and rather than grieving for the loss of Sarah and Amina, she made every effort to remove Yaser's association with the crime. As time passed by, emotions heightened, and both families and everyone around them seemed to be split down the middle. Patricia and Yaser's family were convinced by his innocence, whereas everyone else was adamant that he was to blame. This even extended to their funeral, where Islam shouted at one of Amina's ex-boyfriends, demanding that he leave. He further blamed him for their deaths, and even began a fight with him. In a move that angered many friends and almost all of Patricia's family, Amina and Sarah were laid to rest at a Muslim cemetery, which, to this day, still remains to be a poorly kept gravesite. Both women were not actually practicing Muslims. In fact, Yaser himself had rarely gone to a mosque or displayed any personal faith. However, Patricia, on the other hand, felt it was the appropriate place. Another poor decision on a already long list of bad acts of devotion toward Yaser.
Yeah, just turn yourself in, and if you do, I'll get you a lawyer to help you out. Maybe they won't put you on death row, but you can sit in prison and think about what you've done.
In the immediate aftermath, Yaser seemed to disappear into thin air, and despite friends and family being interviewed by the police, no one came forward with any information or evidence. What is rather strange is that Yaser managed to fire a total of 11 shots in a very busy part of Irvine without being noticed during or even after, which makes it almost impossible to evade without any sort of help or support. And although he may have had a pair of clean clothes on him, he likely needed someone to pick him up, considering his daughters were dead inside his own vehicle. But without any information on his whereabouts, the case eventually went cold, and the FBI had to consider that perhaps he had fled the country back to Egypt. With this in mind, Yaser Abdel Said was officially placed on the FBI's most wanted list, where he would remain for several more years. And trust me, many people wanted him caught, or even worse.
I want worse. I want so much worse.
Despite this, nobody actually knew what happened to Yaser. It was speculated that his brother Yassine picked him up near the crime scene. However, with no evidence, no charges were ever pressed. Yaser's son travelled to Egypt shortly after the murders, where he then descended into an angered frenzy. The deluded man sent dozens of derogatory emails to Patricia's family during this time frame, always reiterating the same overall message: that his sisters died because of their own behaviour. Although Islam's visit back to Egypt increased the speculation that Yaser had fled the country, it turns out that he was actually a lot closer than they had thought. The truth is, Yaser never even left Texas. He was actually staying in an apartment owned by his brothers, and for 9 years, even after he was put on the FBI's most wanted list, he lived undetected and without raising any suspicion whatsoever. Now, this is completely ridiculous if you ask me. The properties must have somehow been connected to Yaser's brothers' names in one way or another, and it seems entirely absurd that the FBI were not able to follow some sort of paper trail here. Anyway, it was in August of 2017 that a maintenance worker was carrying out repairs on an air conditioning unit within the same block of apartments. It was in that moment that, with the help of the FBI's most wanted list, that he spotted a man that looked like Yaser. He immediately reported the sightings to the authorities, but by the time that the search warrant was issued, Yaser had conveniently vanished. However, what agents did find left behind was rather interesting. Directly under the balcony of the second-floor apartment lay a bush, and inside that bush, agents found a pair of glasses and dozens of cigarette butts. Now, although Islam had connections to the apartment, he was known to not be a smoker, but his father certainly was. Forensic agents were able to demonstrate a novel technique known as kinship DNA analysis, and through this method, they were able to prove that these glasses did in fact belong to Yaser. After 9 long years of being on the run, they finally had proof that he was still in the country. Now, Yaser's case remained relatively quiet after this, but 3 years later, in 2020, one final and crucial breakthrough would occur. Various reports had come through to authorities to suggest that maybe he was holed up in a small house in Justin, Texas. And although they were not entirely sure, various local reports had suggested their sightings to special agents. The house was in a rural and isolated part of Justin, and if Yaser really was in there, he was well hidden from any prying eyes. After setting up a surveillance team around the property, agents eventually noticed Islam and Yasin enter the house with food, before eventually leaving with bin bags. And then, later on that night, they saw the shadow of a third man moving around the inside of the house. The discovery stirred enough suspicion to execute a warrant, and FBI agents prepared to raid the property. And on August the 26th, 2020, they stormed in to finally find Yaser hiding inside. At long last, after more than 12 years on the run, he had finally been found. The man was arrested immediately, with Islam and Yasin arrested shortly afterwards. The story made national headlines for a second time, but now people were not just reminded of Yaser's monstrous actions against his daughters, but also that an FBI's most wanted fugitive had finally been caught. And therefore, when his trial began 2 years later in August of 2022, there was no shortage of public interest. Now, despite Texas being a state that could technically enforce it, the death penalty was not sought for Yaser. His defense tried to claim he was innocent, claiming that society had, quote, been rooted in post-9/11 Islamophobia. Other members of the Said family would even deny it was an honor killing, claiming that if he had murdered his daughters, it was simply because he had snapped in the moment. But still, Yaser claimed that he was innocent. Apparently, he had the feeling that after leaving the taxi, someone was watching him and his daughters where they parked. Saying that, he gave no real good reason as to why he left the taxi, or why he even ran away and then remained at large for more than 12 years after. Sarah's frantic 911 call, which was recorded after being shot 9 times, was questioned by the defense. They argued that she probably would have been confused and incoherent due to her injuries. But this did little in the face of the audio transcript, where she clearly stated that her dad had shot her. During his trial, Patricia confessed that Yaser had been abusive both to herself and to his daughters prior to the killing, even recalling a time when he had threatened them with a gun. Addressing Yaser in court, his sister-in-law, Connie McGeough, summed up the situation as best as could be expected. "There is no honor in killing 2 unarmed people. I call that being a coward. The only thing that you did to your family was stain it with your own family's blood. And now it is your turn to get what you have given. A prison that you call home." After only 3 hours of deliberation, Yaser Said was found guilty of capital murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and was incarcerated at the McDonnell Unit in Texas Department of Criminal Justice, where he remains to this day and will die behind bars. In January of 2021, Islam Yaser Abdel Said pleaded guilty to harboring a fugitive.
Hey, tell you, bub, but they say everything's bigger in Texas. Your booty hole gonna be big, too.
Conspiring to harbor a fugitive, and 1 count of conspiracy to obstruct justice. He was therefore sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. In February 2021, Yaser's brother Yasin was found guilty of conspiracy and harboring a fugitive, therefore being sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Both Islam and Yasin are serving their time together in the Federal Correction Institution of Bastrop. Thinking about it, it is actually quite impressive to remain hidden for so long in such close proximity.
Right.
To be on the FBI's most wanted list for a total of 12 years and remain at large is no small achievement, especially for the standards of someone like Yaser. Yaser's crimes make this one even more unusual. To murder both of your daughters is absolutely despicable. But what makes this strange is how much his wife and his own son stood up for him. Patricia's behaviour throughout this entire case is incredibly bizarre. Though it does make you wonder, she was likely under his abusive spell for quite a long period of time. Now, obviously, religion was a big problem in this case, which is another strange side note actually, because Yaser didn't closely follow Islam. To add to this, he was even married in a Christian church. Which is kind of ironic when you think about it, because the man was so adamant on arranging a marriage for his own daughter back in Egypt. And despite allowing many Western traditions in his own family home, he decided this was an honor killing after they began to date Western boys. Honestly, there are so many contradictions to his beliefs. On New Year's Day of 2008, Amina and Sarah lost their lives at the hands of their own father. Amina was only 19 years of age, and Sarah only 18. Barely even adults, they had their whole lives ahead of them.
They was
And
babies.
were making moves towards creating lives for themselves. Lives away from their obsessive, abusive tyrant of a father. Before they could make it out alive, the family's volatile situation suffocated their ability to live, and eventually even cost them their lives. Neither Sarah nor Amina behaved in a way that any of us would deem unsavory. They were hard-working, pleasant and likable young women that simply had the severe misfortune to be born into a family where the odds were endlessly stacked against them. They suffered under an abusive and controlling father, a man who spied on them, abused them, and tried to maintain his power over every aspect of their lives. They had a brother who was conditioned to understand that this was normal, and consequentially went along with it. And although they may have had Patricia as the woman that gave birth to them, biology aside, she was not the mother they both so desperately needed her to be. Saying that, it is impossible to deny that she also suffered under Yaser's hand, and with a severely underaged marriage and 3 kids by the age of 18, she very clearly was another one of his victims, and the longest enduring one at that. The reality is, though, that she failed her daughters at almost every single turn, and every time that she fled the home with them, she always forced them to return. By the way, this was despite the countless offers of sanctuary from her own family. Even after their deaths, Patricia's behaviour was, quite frankly, terrible. She hampered all efforts to find Yaser and cared more about his image. And despite no charges being laid against her, almost every interview of her that I see displays her defending her ex-husband. To put things short and blunt, she had every opportunity to save her daughters. I guess being complacent and apathetic to the situation was the path of least resistance for her. Amina and Sarah lost their lives at the hands of their father, and were failed at every turn by those who should have protected them the most. Their futures were stolen by adults that could barely be described as parents, and Yaser's extended family made that even worse. And all of this is nothing but the most severe of tragedies.
Okay, turn it off, Dad.
I'm not really sure what else I can say about this story, it's just generally sad all round.
Yes, it is. I would not classify those 2 people as parents in any way, shape, or form. You got sperm donor and oven. That's all you could classify either of them motherfuckers as. I'm sorry, but fuck that. Babies come first, period. If there's something happening and you leave, don't go back. Stay fucking gone. Those kids are more important than any of your stupid bullshit, period. All right. Yep, I am completely traumatized. I just want to go home, go to bed, not wake up for a couple days. That was just disturbing. All right, if y'all I enjoyed today's story, so if y'all enjoyed today's story as much as I did, but think it's a really fucked up story, then go down there and hit that thumbs up button. It really helps the channel grow. And while you're down there, why don't you go on over, hit that little subscribe button, become part of the Built 5000 Nation. Because we do some crazy shit here, bruh. As always, be good to one another. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. Bud, things are bigger in Texas. By the time they're done with you, it's gonna be like tumbleweeds falling out of a train tunnel, bud. Wow, wow, wow.